In 1926, the US Army builds a fighter plane cockpit for one specific man. They measure him, average him out of thousands of bodies, and lock the seat, the pedals, and the stick to his exact proportions. There's just one problem. That man never existed anywhere outside the math. You felt this in every economy seat you've ever squeezed into. The person that seat was built for doesn't exist either.
Every time it's like riding with like seats at the knees. It could be better.
To understand how that seat ended up in the sky, go back 100 years before that crash. Start with a man who looked at a list of numbers and saw something hidden in them. His name was Adolphe Quételet, and he was an astronomer. In the 1830s, astronomers had a headache. Their instruments were sloppy, so 10 people measuring the same star got 10 different answers. Their fix was averaging. Take the readings, add them up, divide by the total, and you land closer to the truth than any single measurement could. It worked fine for stars. So Quételet asked a question obvious in hindsight and insane at the time. What if you could do the same thing to people? He got chest measurements of over 5,000 Scottish soldiers and ran the math. The average, 39.75 inches. For most scientists, a footnote. For Quételet, it was an obsession. He didn't just see a number, he saw a blueprint. A perfect soldier that no real soldier matched. Every man who measured a 38-inch chest or a 40-inch chest wasn't just different. He was wrong. He pointed that same logic at marriage rates, at crime, at suicide rates across entire countries. He wasn't just describing people. He was deciding what a normal person looked like, and anyone who didn't match was a deviation. And people ate it up. By the 1840s, Quételet's an actual celebrity, mentioned in the same breath as Newton. Thinkers like Karl Marx start wondering if human life follows fixed laws, just like physics does. And this wasn't just a debate in books. Abraham Lincoln read Quételet's work and decided to test it on a real army. That's where the idea stops being academic and starts reshaping objects. Lincoln is losing ground against the Confederacy and realizes he barely knows his own army. So he orders a massive study of Union soldiers, following Quételet's methods to the letter. Researchers calculate the averages for everything: how much soldiers eat, how far they can reach, what kind of build fills out a uniform. Custom-sewn uniforms worked fine for a small army, not for hundreds of thousands of men who needed clothing fast. So the army split everyone into rough categories: small, medium, large. But what if you didn't fit? Meet Pat Bain. Union soldier, 6'9", well past anything small, medium, or large could account for. Bain spent the war in sleeves that stopped short of his wrists and trousers that rode up his shins. Years later, he filed a pension claim citing disabilities from years of ill-fitting gear. He was a real person carrying real damage from a system that never accounted for him. The army had a category for the average soldier and categories for men close enough to it. It never had one for Pat Bain. The system had no category for him when he was alive, and none for the damage it did to him either. That's averaging leaving the page and landing on your skin, the ancestor of the tag on the shirt you're wearing. A formula built to describe Scottish soldiers from the 1840s is still deciding who's overweight today. That's Quételet's body mass index, a ratio of height to weight he built to describe the average man, and we never let go of it.
The major problem with using BMI as a marker of health when it comes to body weight, because it penalizes you if you have a lot of muscle and you're healthier.
Take Ilona Maher, the Olympic rugby player who helped Team USA win bronze in Paris. She's built for contact, all muscle and power, competing at the highest level her sport has. And BMI still tags her as overweight. Not because there's anything wrong with her body, but because a ratio built off 19th century soldiers has no idea what to do with an athlete's frame. The formula just sees a number it doesn't like. None of this stayed in a tailor's shop. It walked into military engineering, and that's where it stopped working. For 20 years, this was fine, mostly because recruiters ran a tape measure down every candidate at the door. Too short, too long in the arms, too wide in the shoulders, and you got waved off before you ever sat in the seat. The cockpit never had to bend because the army just filtered out anyone it didn't fit.
The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor.
Germany has declared war on...
Then World War II hits, and the Air Force needs pilots fast, hundreds of them. Way more than the small pool that used to squeeze into that 1920s cockpit. and performance falls off a cliff. Pilots are crashing constantly, not just in combat, in training, on runs that should have been routine. Command runs through every explanation they can think of. Bad training, bad planes, pilots who can't handle newer, faster aircraft. Every theory gets tested, every theory comes up empty. That pilot in 1943, the plane was fine. The cockpit was killing men it was never built to hold. Eventually, somebody floats a different idea. Maybe the cockpit doesn't fit anymore, because the average American male grew since the 1920s. So in 1950, researchers at Wright Air Force Base get sent out to recalculate the average. One of them is a young Harvard graduate named Gilbert S. Daniels. Daniels goes base to base with a tape measure, working through 10 dimensions that matter for cockpit design: arm length, leg length, chest, waist, torso height, and more. By the time he's done, he's measured 4,063 airmen, and he starts running the numbers to define the new, updated average pilot. Instead, he finds this: not one airman out of 4,063 lands within the average range on all 10 dimensions. 0. Daniels narrows it to just 3 dimensions, figuring that's low enough that somebody has to clear it. Less than 5% do. The average pilot the Air Force built its entire cockpit around for over 2 decades doesn't exist, and never did, not among 4,000 real men measured in careful detail. The Air Force didn't sit on that finding. Within a few years, they scrap average-based design and switch to adjustable everything. Seats that slide, pedals that extend, straps that cinch to fit whoever's wearing them. And pilot performance climbs almost as soon as the change goes in, because the plane finally bends to the person flying it, and the pilot stops bending to the plane. Decades later, a pilot climbs into an A-10 Warthog. She's 5'4", seat pushed all the way up, pedals pulled all the way in, flying a plane that was never built with her frame in mind. In 2003, over Baghdad, enemy fire tears her plane apart. She brings it down on one wheel, the plane falling apart around her, and steps out alive.
I knew there was a possibility that I might not make it.
That's Captain Kim Campbell, and that landing was possible because the cockpit flexed to fit her instead of the other way around. We're still doing it. Airplane seats get built around a reference passenger, a hypothetical body pulled from old survey data, and that data traces straight back to those same US Army studies, which drift from the general population in one place: weight and body size. That's why your knees hit the seat back in front of you, and the armrest never lines up right. The survey the seat was built on never really matched the people sitting in it. Crash test dummies run the same story. The standard dummy used for decades is modeled on the 50th percentile male from 1970s Army data, about 5 feet 9 inches and 171 pounds, and cars get engineered and tested to protect that dummy first. Women are 17% more likely to die in a comparable crash, and nearly 3 times more likely to get seriously hurt, because the seatbelt geometry, the headrest position, and the airbag timing all got tuned to a body that isn't theirs. Kids fare worse, still tested with dummies that are just shrunk down adults instead of dummies built off real child anatomy. Walk onto a job site and the same gap is waiting in the equipment locker. Hard hats, gloves, respirators, harnesses, all size for a worker who fits the middle. Most workers don't. So gear doesn't seal, doesn't move, doesn't protect. A respirator that doesn't fit a smaller face isn't just uncomfortable, it can't do its one job. Adjustable seats, customizable safety harnesses, modular gear that fits a range of bodies. 80 years later, we're still buckling people into seats built for someone who was never real. Subscribe for more on the hidden design decisions shaping your everyday life.